Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Understanding Sibling Guardianship, Preparing for Your New Role as Your Parents Age. Today's session is part of the Caring Across Generations webinar series for families of individuals with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities. The series is hosted by the Rutgers Community Living Education Project, also known as CLEP. My name is Melanie McGackin, and I'm honored to represent the Rutgers CLEP team during today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to share a little bit about the Rutgers Community Living Education Project. CLEP partners with people with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities, their families, and professionals in the field, offering education, resources, and support in exploring all options in community living. The CLEP team draws from both our lived and professional experiences as we help individuals and families explore the full range of community living options in both self-direction and provider-managed settings. We take pride in empowering others to understand their choices, plan for the future, and to ensure their loved ones can live meaningful community-based lives of choice. CLEP is supported through the New Jersey Division of Developmental Disabilities, also known as DDD, and is available at no cost to you. So before we begin today's session, just a few housekeeping notes. All participants are currently muted and off camera. We encourage you to use your chat feature to share comments or resources. We're here to learn from each other, so feel free to contribute. If you have questions for today's presenter, please feel free to use the Q&A section throughout today's presentation. We'll address questions during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar as time allows. Now, turning to today's topic. Many siblings eventually become guardian for a brother or sister. This transition can bring up complex emotions, difficult conversations, and important legal decisions for the entire family. It can feel overwhelming for everyone involved. Today's webinar is designed to help you feel more informed, better prepared, and less alone as you're navigating this journey. During this session, attorney Hillary Freeman of Freeman Law Offices will walk you through what to expect before and after a guardianship transition, including key legal procedures, ongoing responsibilities, and practical considerations to ensure your loved one continues to receive the care and the support that they both want and deserve. Hillary brings not only her legal expertise to today's presentation, but also her lived experience as a sibling. Today, she will share her guidance to help families plan with both confidence and feeling secure for the future. We hope this session provides you both clarity and reassurance as you think about the road ahead. With that, it's always my pleasure to turn things over to a longtime friend and someone who has offered a lot of professional guidance to many families, Hillary Freeman. So without further ado, Hillary, welcome.
Thank you so much. Melanie, you are seriously the best person ever. I just want to thank you for having me today to talk about guardianship and what that means as siblings take on, or other children or other family members take on the role of guardianship as parents age. It is, as Melanie had mentioned, this is a personal topic for me as well. My brother is 53 years old. My parents, who I hope are not listening to this presentation, are 78 and or 77 and 79, approaching 80. And they are, they are loving Florida, playing golf, but it wasn't always that way. They have lived in New Jersey for their entire life, and it took a lot for them to go down to Florida. They're there for the winter, and then they come back for the summer. And I have to tell you that we started the transition early. They're still guardians, but my sister and I are also co-guardians along with my parents. And we started early. I remember a conversation that I had with my parents, so specifically my mother, who was very jealous that her friends were in Florida and playing golf and playing cards and just enjoying retirement. And she felt like she could never leave New Jersey because that's where my brother is. He lives in a group home in Robbinsville, New Jersey. And I reminded her that that we do have phones available and we have planes. So, she can call in at any time. She can FaceTime. And if she needs to fly back for any reason, we have airplanes. So it took a lot of convincing, but once she realized that, she also was able to go down to Florida with her and be with her friends, enjoy retirement along with my father. And my sister and I are here in New Jersey if my brother needs anything, or just to enjoy our recreational time when they're down in Florida. So like I said, this is a personal topic for me, and I am literally going through it as we speak. So I thought it was very important, and it would be very helpful to share what is the different things to consider as as your parents age, or as your other neurotypically developing children get older, and what they should know about. So something to remember, your role as the guardian, as a successor guardian, or even as the primary guardian, it starts on day one. Okay, whenever that might be, you don't necessarily know when that's going to be, but it starts immediately when you assume that responsibility. So it is really helpful to kind of have a transition into the role as maybe a president would, as they get a transition team. I just thought of that analogy right now, but the president would have a transition team easing their way in to learn about the process, learn about their responsibilities, gather people, the right teams together, and while you're not the president of the United States or any other organization necessarily, that you are assuming a new role, and you might be taking over for somebody else. So it's really helpful to understand what that involves before assuming that role, so you're ready to go as on day one, excuse me. So with that, this is what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to explain what guardianship is. As parents age, that doesn't necessarily, and this topic is we're going to obviously talk about guardianship and what it is, but recognize that just because parents are aging and your sibling neurotypically developing children are getting involved, they might not necessarily understand what guardianship is, what their responsibilities are, or when it's appropriate. And also recognize guardianship is not always in place when the parents age, even though it may have been necessary. So I'm going to talk about the process, but also I'm going to explain how it could be, I'm going to say, passed down to a successor guardian, because there are multiple ways of making that happen as well. We're going to be talking about not just guardianship, but we'll also talk about the different supports and benefits that can be put in place. I'm not going to go into detail with those. I'm going to touch upon that so you know to either research it later, or maybe we'll do follow-up webinars on it. But I just want to highlight these key terms for you to be prepared to look into or pay attention to in the future. And I'm also going to talk about different ways legally and practically on how you can handle, you have the different responsibilities and how you can manage that, along with managing and taking care and being with your own family. I am married and I have a daughter who's 2.5 years old. So with my daughter and with my family, I want to be with them, but I'm also want to be with my brother. So we talk about how to handle all of that while also enjoying everybody's participation and presence. And then also, of course, we're talking about accessing the right supports and resources, and how to put a team together to help you along the process. So this is the reality. When siblings assume this role, it is challenging. I'm not going to say it's an exciting transition. It's not. It's just something that we know that often that we're going to have to accept, and it's just part of our life. It happens at different times. In our family, my sister and I decided that it would be helpful to assume the role as co-guardians with my parents. several years ago, because not only are my parents aging, but we are taking more of a responsibility in terms of decision making, talking to doctors, making sure finances are managed appropriately. And it just made sense to go file for co-guardianship at the same time, well, as that my parents are the guardians, so we could all do it together. That said, that was a decision that we made, like I said, a few years ago, but I've been doing this, practicing in this area for 20 years. And I used to tell my clients that you might not want to have your neurotypically developing children as co-guardians with your parent, with you as the guardians at the same time, because we now have the same rights as my parents do. And sometimes that can interfere, that could be a problem if you don't all get along and you don't make the decisions the right way, so, or the same way. That can definitely be a problem. But in my family, it was the right decision. And I'm frankly, I'm not going to shy away from telling parents or telling families when it might be appropriate to do any longer. Having gone through it myself and having experienced that, there's certainly benefits to having everybody as co-guardians at the same time. But so my parents were there, they were guardians. My sister and I also assumed the role, so we know we now have more responsibilities. And we can talk to doctors at any time. The group home, the people in my brother's program, feel very comfortable talking to us, just like they feel comfortable talking to my parents. And nobody can question our authority. Nobody can question our roles in my brother's life. And while we did have some hiccups in the beginning in terms of what was best for my brother, we were able to work it out and we all assumed our respective roles. I'm really more helpful with managing finances and programming and developing his program. And my sister is wonderful in stepping in on the medical care. She can go to doctor's appointments. She can talk to doctors. She's in the medical arena herself. So that is her forte, and we're able to divide and conquer. Also, something to be thinking about, which I'm talking really now to the siblings. I'm not necessarily talking to the parents here who are currently the guardians. We were definitely very, very stressed, my sister and I, about how this was going to take place because frankly and appropriately, my mother I'm going to say loosely, is a control freak. And she needs to know everything and make all of the decisions. And we were afraid of how we were going to tell her that we need to step in at the appropriate times. Well, frankly, she is stepping back already, and we didn't have to ask her to do it. And we're not suggesting that we don't want her to necessarily, but she is voluntarily stepping back and saying, you know what, you guys handle it. I'm at my capacity. I can't do this anymore. And of course, we consult her and we ask her opinions. But we are having, as I mentioned during our last presentation, my brother's having some medical issues with respect to seizures, and she's okay with us taking the lead on this and finding new doctors and moving forward to try to address these seizure challenges. So for siblings, I recognize that this could be a fear of yours. Parents, I can also recognize this is a fear of yours and might produce some anxiety about having to step back. But it's something that could really happen naturally, and it's hard, but it's nice when that happens and you don't have to be fighting about who has control and who has power. Recognizing that everybody has your now adult siblings' needs and best interests at heart. That's taking into account all of these different points, different things that you have to think about with respect to when is the right time to step in. When a parent passes, you're not going to know when the parent passes away. Most often, you're not going to be able to plan for it. Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but there's a lot of emotion during this time because you're facing both the parents, what they're going through, and you also need to step up to help with your siblings' care. So what is guardianship? Guardianship is when a child now turns 18 and they are under the law, they're legally independent. They can make their own decisions. They can decide where they want to live. They can decide, manage their own finances. They can make all of their own decisions, sign their own contracts. But sometimes it's not necessarily appropriate for an individual to do that because of their disability. Their disability might interfere with their ability to make these decisions appropriately or what's in their best interests. So the guardianship process in and of itself is when the child turns 18 or if they might be older and they're above the age of 18 and you need to go to court as a parent or as a loved one to ask the court for permission to keep making decisions for this individual. And you can say to the court, look, we recognize that this person is 18 and legally they have the right to make their own decisions. However, because of their disability, they're not able to do so. They need more support. So, Judge, would you please appoint me as the guardian so I can make these decisions on behalf of this individual? Of course, you're always supposed to take their interests keep their interests in mind. You're not supposed to just do what you want. You have to do what's good for them, what they want to do. You should be consulting them to the extent that they have the ability to advocate for themselves. But at the end of the day, if you are appointed as the guardian, you have the legal right to make the decisions and what's in the best interest of that particular individual. Sometimes people do not need a full guardian. Sometimes they might need, I call it what's called a guardianship with carve outs. You're making the decision for them in certain respects, maybe with respect to finances, but maybe medically they feel comfortable and they're able to understand their own medical needs and talk to doctors on their own behalf, and they might not need somebody to make those decisions. So that would be called a limited guardianship, and it's not limited to a property or medical needs necessarily. You can carve it out in different ways, like the person will still have the right to drive. They always have the right to vote, whether they have the right to get married or not, whether they have the right to decide where they live. These are decisions that would, if this would be called a limited guardianship. You're saying I will control their finances, but they have the right to decide where they live or talk to doctors and consent to surgery or something like that. That's what we call limited guardianship. What is appropriate for that individual? In our office, we go through a series of questions to learn more, and we make recommendations as to what kind of guardianship would be appropriate. You're not bound by our opinions. Ultimately, you'd be bound by the court's decision, but we can guide you in that way. But if you go to somebody else who handles guardianships, same thing. They would probably guide you into what would be appropriate for that particular individual or your situation. We're here to guide you. We're not here to make any decisions for you. We're here to guide you. Of course, you don't need to hire an attorney to file for guardianship. You can do it on your own. You go to the New Jersey court's website, and there's an application, and there are instructions on how to do it yourself. Lots of parents, when it's appropriate, to file for guardianship when their child turns 18. There's a new law that was recently passed that now allows you to file for guardianship 6 months before they turn 18. So it's in place when they turn 18. But I've had certainly a lot of situations where parents do not file for guardianship at all, and then siblings take over and they say to me, they should have filed for guardianship. I'm not sure why they didn't. But we want to move forward with that process now. So those are situations that, of course, you can do it at any time after the child turns 18 as well. Any questions so far?
Hillary, we do have a question. If a co-guardian moves out of state and another co-guardian remains in state, does that change anything? The individual moving out of state would remain an advocate and stay informed and in contact with all parties in state, as well as plan visits as frequently as possible. So does being in state even play a role in
No.
guardianship?
No, it doesn't matter where the person is, as long as they're exercising their duties as the guardian, they can be in any state. And if the person, and I can speak for New Jersey and Pennsylvania, in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, as long as the individual continues to live in the state, the guardian can live anywhere, and they have the same rights as though they lived in the state in which the individual lives. If, on the other hand, and this is a little bit off a tangent from that question, but if the individual moves out of state, you would need to get the guardianship transferred to that state in which that individual lives.
Great. And as a parent of a special needs individual who is age 25, with other children and siblings at home, I wonder whether my other children feel obligated or, on the other hand, even interested in assisting with their sibling in the future. What is the best way to start the conversation? Any tips?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the at a cursory overview, you can figure out, you can look at their interest and involvement in what you're doing as the parent. Are they paying attention to the decisions that you're making? Of course, it might depend on age. Some teenagers are not even interested at all in what their parents are doing or siblings, but are doing. But I would suggest, at first glance, look at their relationship with your child with special needs, and figure out if they do have a good relationship. If there's any resentment, maybe the individual with a disability gets more attention, and if they look at the other siblings to see if they understand that attention, if they're compassionate towards your sibling with their sibling with special needs. I'm learning to talk here, or you can just try saying that 10 times fast. It's not the easiest task in the world. So that's how I would start, and then you can gradually start including them in the conversations and the decisions that you're making, as you feel is age appropriate, and see how they respond. If I'm assuming they're younger, by the way, if they're older, again, the same approach could apply. You could include them in the conversations and see what their level of interest is. And then eventually approach the conversation. But I wouldn't just have the conversation full on right away without assessing what their interest and involvement has been.
Sure. And if I could also add
Yeah.
briefly, and I think I shared a little bit on your first session of this series. When we started, my son's 27. My son does live outside of our family's home in a provider managed setting where we have a lot of oversight. But we started the conversation with my daughter, who's 2 years younger than him. So my daughter's 25 right now. But we started the conversation with her at a very early age in regards to starting to join some of his IEP meetings, right? And that really started her first year of high school. I think us modeling how to advocate for him, what was important for us to pursue for him, and how we went about that, hopefully respectfully most of the time, was really important for us. Then, in regards to guardianship, we did start that conversation again when she was in high school, right? Very lightly, that conversation was introduced. She made her wishes known. We were happy that she was definitely interested. And then in the more recent years, we recognized that maybe she's going to need support in playing this role. And I'm lucky enough that my niece is actually on today's session listening, Hillary, to your advice. And so we approached my niece to play a role with my daughter. I think them supporting each other, they both have really different skill sets and strengths, and sort of like you and your sister can play very different roles that would complement each other. But thinking about, right, maybe not just a sibling, but who else is closest to that person. My niece is honestly like a daughter to me. So that just was sort of natural, and she was willing. But yes, I always say start early as you're comfortable starting those conversations. That way, I think growing that expectation with that relationship is always adds some benefits, right? It's important to do.
Yeah. And I don't, and to add to your point about not necessarily having a sibling do it, or maybe considering other people outside of your family, I had a case where my brother's been at Eden since he was 11, and now he's 53. And we have all the siblings have grown up together. So we all know each other. We're friends. We consult each other when needed. And I was doing the estate plan for one of the families at Eden, and she appointed a sibling of somebody else as the guardian, a successor guardian when she passed away. And she has since assumed that role because that mother did pass away. So she is now, she's a guardian for her brother at Eden, and she was also the guardian for this other woman at Eden, and she's doing a phenomenal job. So if sometimes that might be appropriate as well, you can ask other siblings to see if they would be interested, since they're already familiar with the process.
Fabulous. So we have a lot more questions, but I'm going to let you get through your presentation. Stop me if you're ready for some more, and otherwise we'll get to them at the end.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks.
So the follow-up question is, when is it needed? I briefly touched upon it earlier as to what guardianship is and the different times that it might be appropriate. These are just some examples as to when guardianship would be needed. The individual, or it should be explored, not necessarily needed. The individual has a developmental disability such as autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. That just because they have these diagnoses alone doesn't mean that they definitely need a guardian or a full guardianship. It's just it raises the question if they have a developmental disability as to whether that should be explored. Intellectual disabilities, the same thing. If they have a lower IQ and it interferes with their ability to understand decisions that they need to make, or how to understand what's being told of them, or how to manage their own finances, that's guardianship would be explored at that time too. Mental illness is a little bit tougher because for some individuals who are maybe bipolar, they are fine when they don't need a guardian necessarily at all times. They might need it when they're off of their medication, but they do need it. They might need a guardian when they're off of their medication, but they don't need it when they're on their medication. So there are arrangements that can be made in that domain when that occurs. Lots of parents usually apply for guardianship, like I said, around the age of 18. It could be 6 months prior, and you can do it at any time after they turn 18. And then, so I'll go through the more formal process later, but after this is explored and it's determined that you want to file for guardianship or that guardianship is needed, you're going to need to file a complaint with the court, along with 2 doctor certifications, or perhaps if they're already DDD eligible, 1 doctor certification and a certification from DDD, to confirm and affirm that the individual is in need of a guardian. They're unable to make decisions for themselves and they need a guardian. Depending on the person that is applying, you might also need fingerprints for a background check. Parents do not need to move forward with that. It is assumed that unless their parental rights were terminated at some point, that they are fit to be the guardians. But siblings and other people that are not necessarily family members might need to go through a background check as well. And you submit these documents to the court. The court will appoint an attorney to represent your child with special needs to meet with them, and to make a determination as to whether they agree that a guardianship would be appropriate, or whether find out even if the individual wants to have a guardian. If the court-appointed attorney agrees, they will write a report indicating that and submit that to the court. If they don't agree, they will also write a report indicating their opinion and submitting that to the court. And if it's not contested, the judges often rule just on the papers, and appearance is not required in most counties, not in all counties. And if it is contested, a court appearance will definitely be required, and a hearing will likely be necessary to determine whether the individual does, in fact, need a guardian. Okay, that's the general process. There are little pieces that I'm overlooking for the moment. This is the general process of what guardianship is like. If something that is a little bit of a nuance if the parents, you have to go through this entire process the first time guardianship is applied for. If it's already determined that the individual is in need of a guardian, parents can appoint a backup guardian in their will, and they can and when they pass away, the people that they appoint can submit their will to the court and with a few other papers, and ask the court, it's the surrogate's court, to transfer the guardianship to them, and then they get new letters appointing them as the guardian. So you don't necessarily have to go through this process every time. You have to go through it once, and then once incapacity is determined and the person is deemed in need of a guardian, successor guardians, it's more of a formality. They have to take the documentation to the court, and the surrogate's court, which is more of an administrative office, and ask for them to transfer the guardianship to the individual that has been appointed to be in that role. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. If you are applying for guardianship to, like we did for my sister and I did have to file paperwork with the court, and get a judge to agree that we were appropriate to be co-guardians because my parents were still alive. It wasn't a big deal. It was pretty simple, but it's just something to pay attention to. I don't want you to be concerned that you have to go through this every time. So what's also really important is that, like we were talking about before, start the conversation early. If your siblings, or if you're going to be assuming the role as guardian, as a successor guardian, talk to your parents, talk to the current guardians, ask for, like, who get a list of the doctors and the providers that are involved in the individual's care. Um, Something that often people don't think about is, when they're in school, you have a case manager who's supposed to be coordinating supports. When the individual is involved with DDD and with other agencies, there's often a supports coordinator that's involved. So you have a case manager, a supports coordinator for adult services. Um, and but to coordinate services, but for medical care, it's usually the guardian that's coordinating the medical care. The doctors don't seem to talk to each other without your prompting. So the parent or guardian is the one that's going from doctor to doctor to doctor and making sure everybody is aware of what the doctor is saying, what the diagnosis is, what the treatment plan might be. So that part is it could be very, very stressful. So the more information you could get about who the doctors are, how they've arrived at the decisions that they're making, why the individual is on medication, what purpose is the medication serving. Sometimes, sometimes there's medication. I mean, there's always medication for behavior modification, social and emotional regulation, seizure control. I'm listing a few different ones. But they might be on certain medications because of allergies or because of drug interactions. Maybe some medications really they had a bad reaction to. They weren't necessarily allergic, but they had a bad reaction to it. So it's important to really coordinate that and make sure you're aware of how the decisions were made to arrive at the point that the individual is at right now. We have been always involved in my brother's care, but definitely in the later years, my father has always been involved, but my mother really was in charge of coordinating everything. We now have a text exchange called Brian's Medical Needs. So we know to keep everything in one place. But we started getting really involved in the different conversations about what was happening. And I started going to ISP meetings. I mean, probably when I started my career in law in special education, about 20 years ago. And my sister has been coming to more and more meetings lately because she's now also assuming the role more hands-on than we've needed in the past. family meetings, I mean, you have to determine whether that's appropriate for you. If your siblings have been involved the entire time, or you need to have a formal meeting as to what's involved. I mean, these are just ideas on how to exchange the information. Um, everybody's going through something. The parents are having a hard time aging and recognizing that they can't make the decisions that they could make at one point. It's very overwhelming as they age. Anxiety goes up. They might understand what's going on, but have trouble acting on the decisions that need to be made. And children are sensitive to, or the siblings are sensitive to the parents aging and recognizing that they are aging, but they do need to step in regardless. So there's a lot of emotion during this time. Just be prepared for that. How to address it, that's going to be on an individual need and a determination, but I have to say, with even the most controlling families, it all seems to work out. This isn't supposed to be completely a negative conversation. It does work out because everybody's working together. The parents and current guardians develop the confidence that the people that are assuming that role know what they're doing and are also going to act in the individual's best interest. So there's a lot of emotion all around, but eventually it settles down and everybody assumes their respective roles and obligations to the extent that there are any. And then so just managing expectations. So, I think coordination is probably the most challenging aspect of this for everybody, for any guardian that's in place. It's really just what's the best way of coordinating care, and it's going to be again individual for your family, but that is a challenging task to take on, and especially when you have your own family and your own jobs. So figuring that out in advance, how that's going to play out is really key. If you don't think you can do it alone, which most people can't, it would be helpful to form the relationships with other people that are maybe involved in support in providing the services, providing the care. It could be family members, it could be friends, it could be just actual providers and professionals who are just familiar with the process. But gathering that team is really, really important. And the sooner you can do it, the better. I mentioned medical history and current conditions already, so I'm not going to go really into that. And medications, daily routines and preferences is, some siblings already are aware of their routines and preferences, others might not be. My brother goes to his day program several days a week, but he also is taken out into the community because we have noticed that my brother is the happiest when he is out in the community. And he is doing various things such as riding the train, going to the mall, and going back and forth on to this vending machine that's in the mall. He going to the park. He just loves being out and about and saying hi to everybody on this earth. He is one of the friendliest guys when he's in a good mood. And he just absolutely loves that. So we know, and my mother has always pushed it, and we know to always pay attention to the activity schedules and be asking questions as to what they did during the day. What activities do they have planned for the week? How are they going to make it happen? And they always send pictures with the smile on his face really to give us the comfort of knowing it's actually happening. So I think it's really he's loving it. He really loves going out into the community. There was a period of time that they didn't take him out into the community very often, and we really did make a big deal about that. And now they has the best staff, and they are taking him out and seeing his attitude change when that occurs. So we know to push for that. We know to advocate for it. And that's an example of something that you might want to pass on to to the siblings, how important whatever their interests are, how making sure they're aware of it, and to continue paying attention to making sure that happens. Behavioral considerations. I'm going to go personally. I have tons of professional examples as well for my clients. But my brother I've mentioned his seizures. His seizure medicine really causes bad behaviors and obsessive behaviors. So we're constantly monitoring the medication to address his behaviors, along and making sure his seizures are still under control. So that's something that, again, medication management, it could be overwhelming. People who are assuming this role might not necessarily know the benefits of each medication. So the more you can get them involved in those conversations, the better, so they understand what to advocate for in the future. um, Educational and employment history. This is something, this is again going to be dependent on the person's age and to what extent it impacts them in the future. But often when they're in school, you're identifying the individual's interests and preferences, what they like, what they don't like. And if they really like something, they carry it on to the adult services and see if they can get support in a job or career in that area. And then again, make sure everybody's aware of it. And make sure they're aware of the supports that the individual needs. And of course, get them involved with the family, keep the going out on going on vacations, bringing them to holidays, or if they're not living at home with you, have them involved as much as you otherwise would. The only difference might be, I mean, they're not living with you, but they can come home and go on events, go to activities with you, just like everybody else who doesn't live at home, and the family gets together. So to the extent that you can keep them involved in their family, they're happy, you're happy, life is great. So try to really foster that as much as you can and show different ways of helping make that happen. We Some examples, we've gone on, when my brother was, he's now in a wheelchair and it's more difficult to get around. But before he went in a wheelchair, we were taking him on cruises with us. Candidly, we haven't been on a cruise in a really long time, but he came on 2 cruises with us, and we brought support from his group home to help take care of him while we were all on the cruise, because he's really a strong guy and we can't control him when he wants a piece of cake. He'll just go after it regardless of whose table he's at. The cake is being served to. So the people in the group home would help take care of him on the cruise, but he was able to enjoy being with our family, and we were able to enjoy having him with us with the support of his group home staff who knew him and were very much involved. So that was just an example of how we were able to see that, so we know in the future we can look out for that. Sorry. So, any questions about any of the things that I just spoke about?
So we have a ton of questions. So what if a sibling co-guardian, let's see, actually we addressed that one a little bit before, but we'll get to that one at the end again if we have time. Let me go to the bottom. If the person with the disability makes their wishes known, would you bring them into the decision as to who they would like to be the successor guardian?
I might talk to them. Yes, I would certainly talk to them about it, because you want to make sure that they have a nice relationship, find out why they want their person to be the successor guardian, what they like, and if the points are what you would view as reasonable points, I would really consider that. But of course, that person might not be considering all of the dynamics, so you'd have to consider that as well. So. So to the extent that it's appropriate, yes, of course, consider what they want, and because you want to make sure everybody gets along and they're receptive to the relationship. But if it's not appropriate for whatever reason, maybe it's too challenging for that person to be the guardian, then also explain that to the individual so they understand how the decision is being made.
Fabulous. And then, excuse me, Hillary, can you talk a little bit about the difference of a co-guardian and a successor guardian?
A co-guardian is somebody that serves alongside with somebody else who is currently the guardian. So maybe, like, for example, two parents. They're co-guardians if they're guardians at the same time. In our case, my sister and I are co-guardians along with my parents. So all four of us are guardians simultaneously. Successor guardianship would be where I'll say in my where they follow the guardians. So if my parents pass away, then my sister and I assumed that role. We would be successor co-guardians. So that's really the only difference. You can be co-guardians with somebody else, or you could serve after that person passes away, and that's the only difference.
Fabulous. And there's someone who is identifying that they may need to redo the type of guardianship that is currently in place, that they may need to have control over some other areas for this person's well-being. How involved is that?
You'd probably have to go back to court. I don't know to what extent you're making that determination, or how much the guardianship needs to change. But if you probably, the simplest answer is you probably need to go back to court to explain why the guardianship powers need to change, and see if and go through that process to see if you have the medical documentation to support that, and then also if you want a determination as to whether your opinion is correct.
And let's get to two more questions before we let you get back. When is power of attorney better than guardianship?
Great question. Power of attorney is when the individual has the ability to understand the power that they're authorizing somebody else to give. And they are comfortable with the person making the decisions when they can't make it for themselves. It's orally revocable. So it's a document. You don't need to go to court for a power of attorney. They can draft it themselves. You can have a lawyer draft it for you. But the key is they have to understand the power that they're giving you. They have to do it voluntarily. And then they're signing a document that authorizes you to make decisions on their behalf when they can't make it for themselves. If they don't like the decisions that you are making, they can take that power away, and that is enforceable. Guardianship is permanent. So the key, but if they don't understand the power that they're giving you, and then you still have them sign the power of attorney, technically that's not enforceable. That's when guardianship would be more appropriate.
And is a will enough to support a successor guardianship?
The will can identify who you want the successor guardians to be. Then that successor guard, when you pass away, the successor guardian will take that will to the court and have and file a few documents to have that the guardianship transferred to them. So it's really a two-step process, but you don't have to go through the full determination of incapacity when the will, if the person already has guardianship and they're passing it down through their will.
Actually, let me get to one more question
Sure.
before I let you get back. I think this
Yes.
is really interesting. If a medical decision needs to be made, do all co-guardians need to sign off on it, or can just one person legally make that determination?
The legal answer is that everybody should be signing off on it. A lot of doctors are fine with one person signing off on it. So it really often depends on the doctor that's treating the individual.
Fabulous. So Hillary, we have 10 more minutes. Why don't you get back to the presentation and we'll get to more questions at the end if you have time.
Okay, great.
Great. Thank
So, during this process, when you're trying to learn more about the parents and current guardians' wishes. You want to find out where their wills and trusts are. Number one, to make sure that the will does identify you as a successor guardian, and you don't have to. I'm going to say fight that battle later on. You want to make sure that the will appropriately identifies who the successor guardian will be. You also want to identify whether there's a special needs trust or a supplemental needs trust that's already created, because often the will direct funds to go into the special needs trust to care for the individual, and you want to know as the guardian where the money would be coming from to advocate and for the individual with special needs, or to just provide services, or to just give them support them in whatever way they need. As the guardian, you're not financially responsible for the individual. The trustee often and usually manages the money that is available for the individual. So the guardian and the trustee could be the same person. I really do encourage that to the extent that it's appropriate, because it's if you're asking somebody else to take care of the individual of your child with special needs, it's nice to give them the money to do it instead of creating another obstacle where they have to go to somebody else to get the money and prove that the money is needed for whatever reason. I often get the question, well, what happens if you don't trust that individual? And should there be a system of checks and balances? Yes, there's an argument for that. My feeling is, if you don't necessarily trust the person, then don't put them in that role. So so there are multiple schools of thought on that. You do what's right for you, but that's something that it's really important to know that the guardian is not financially responsible. So how do they get the money to help the child with special needs? And a power of attorney is also really important. If my parents are unable to make decisions and I didn't have guardianship, for example, the power of attorney is a document that authorizes somebody else to make medical decisions or financial decisions on your behalf in the event you can't make it for yourself. In our office, one of the powers that we put into the power of attorney is that if you, as the parents, are unable to make decisions for yourself, somebody can step in and they can also make decisions for my brother or your child with special needs. So you're alive at this point with the power of attorney, but you're authorizing somebody else to make decisions on your behalf and perhaps your loved one with special needs. So if you've done that in your power of attorney, you have to give it to the person or make the person aware of where they can find it if should you not be able to make decisions for yourself or in the appropriate time and place. Healthcare directives are documents that are basically stating your wishes as to whether you want to, if you're if you're medically fragile and you're unlikely to recover, do you want a do not resuscitate order? Do you want to pass away naturally? That the healthcare, excuse me, the healthcare directives will give that direction. So it's important for people to know who are be responsible for exercising that right or making those decisions, for them to know where these documents are. ABLE accounts, if they exist in your family, it's important to make sure that somebody else is aware of how to access the funds in the ABLE accounts. Same thing with special needs trusts. As they also need to know who the representative payee it might be for the SSI benefits, or how much money the person would be receiving, and how much money they're allowed to have in their account without jeopardizing government benefits, and also insurance policies. Many people fund special needs trusts through life insurance policies, or maybe there's a disability policy. It's just really important to share this information with the person that would be assuming this role, so to make it so they don't have to go searching for all of this information. They don't necessarily have to have all of the documents. They need to just know where to go to get them and the appropriate times. So again, things to think about. The current care arrangements. This is a fun one because sometimes you might not necessarily agree with your parents. You might agree with your parents. Everything might be working, but you might not always agree with them, and your parents might want certain arrangements. They have put it in place, but as you are continue on with the care and advocacy, you might realize there's something better out there. look, research is changing, where research is evolving. We have more supports and resources available than we ever have in the past. They're still short on a lot of resources, but we know we still have more available than we ever have in the past. So as a guardian, you might be making new decisions that may not have been available in the past or may not have worked in the past. So you want to assess whether everything is currently working for your liking and for your loved one's liking. Living situation. My brother was in a group home with five guys at one when he was younger. That didn't work as well because one guy kept on taking my brother's toilet paper every time he went to the bathroom, and we ended up moving him ultimately into another group home that worked out well until his medical needs increased, and now he's in a supervised apartment with one other person, and there's two support staff, and that's working well now. Whether that will continue to work well in a year or 2 years from now, I don't know. But we'll have to address that under the circumstances when it presents itself. But these are different factors that you want to look into and assess. Is it currently working? Will it continue to work? Do we need to make any changes? And if we need to make changes, how do we make those changes? And then with all of that, I'm sure I'm exhausting you with all of the things to consider at this point. I hope you had a cup of Starbucks or your own coffee of choice before this presentation. But you do have to look at whether you're ready, if you're going to be stepping into this role, whether you have the capacity to do this. It is a lot. There's no question about it. We have, my sister and I, as I mentioned before, have assumed our respective roles. My mother is, as she's retired, she's in Florida. She's playing golf, but so she's still coordinating all of the supports and the doctor's appointments and doing a phenomenal job with it. But my sister and I are going to doctor's appointments. We're talking to staff. We are more quote unquote on the ground in terms of what is occurring. And we all talk together when a big decision needs to be made, how that's going to be made, whether we all agree with it, and whether it's the right thing moving forward. So if you're not alone, if you are an only child or you're a sibling that's going to be taking on the role by yourself, you believe it or not, you're still not alone. There are many organizations that can help you. Melanie is the one of the best resources that you can have in your at your disposal. I'm certainly available to help. There are definitely other nonprofit organizations that can help, along with people in your child's program, so they can guide you to the proper resources. Um, so we already went through this a bit in terms of the steps to file for guardianship and how that can be passed on. So I'll skip over that. The guardian of the person there are two different roles: guardianship of the person, guardianship over the property. Guardianship over the person, you're in charge of advocating for the individual's best interests. Healthcare decisions, talking to doctors, making decisions with respect to medicine, of course, with the doctor's guidance. Usually it's not supposed to be on your own. Where they live, who should be involved in the care of your child's life, or your loved sibling's life, where they're working. Again, if they can advocate for themselves, fantastic. If they have certain interests and preferences, it's your job to not necessarily make the decisions as to where they're going to work. It could be if you want it to be, but you could be working with a support coordinator or another advocate to determine if that's the right placement. So if it is the right placement, what supports can be provided, and then how to make that happen. Figuring out if they have the budget to do it. Do you have to appeal the budget through the NJCAT? Figuring out how to get the supports in place to enhance the loved one's quality of life. And then, of course, getting them involved in social and recreational activities. It might be coordinating. It's not necessarily that you have to be there for every game or every activity. A lot of it could be coordinating, but it's your job to figure out how to coordinate, whether you have to outsource that for lack of a better term, or if that's something that you want to handle yourself. Everybody has their own preferences on how they do it. But that's just a decision that you are going to want to and need to make. Guardianship over the estate. If they have guardian, if they need a guardian, they don't often don't have a lot of money in their name. It doesn't mean they can't have money in their name. It just means they often don't. When you're talking in this domain in terms of a child who has a disability and you're now getting guardianship. And the reason for that is that they often need, not always, but they often need adult services. And adult services require that the individual be eligible for Medicaid benefits in order to provide for the adult services. Again, this is not every situation, but I'm saying often this occurs. So you don't necessarily have to worry about finances, but if you do, you have to figure out, does the person have money in their name? Do you need to move it out of their name so they can qualify for benefits? How do you make that happen without jeopardizing benefits or interfering with their ability to access benefits? Who's going to pay their bills, taxes? How can they is their money best served in an ABLE account, or should it be in a special needs trust? Just things to consider. Who's responsible for making sure that the money does not exceed the maximum amount that the individual can have to qualify for benefits? I mentioned before in previous presentations, I had conversations with my mother, and every now and then I'm filling out this accounting form to show what we're doing with his money. And every now and then I ask my mother how much is in his account, and there have been times where she said it exceeded 2,000, and then she probably turns pale. We're not on FaceTime when it's happening, but she probably turns pale, recognizing it's not okay. And I'm going to have a conversation with her about how it's not okay. So it's important to make sure you're aware of how much is in the account and what it's being spent on. And then, of course, who's responsible for filing these documents with the court to determine how much money the individual has in their name and how it's being managed. These are just some best practices that I came up with in terms of how to make the decisions, things to consider, points to consider to make sure everybody's happy and organized. Person-centered planning is the one that I really think is probably not so obvious, but by its wording, and that is really where you're taking the individual's interests and preferences and keeping those in mind when you're making decisions, rather than making decisions of how you would want to be treated, or how you would want to be cared for, looking at what their interests and preferences are and making decisions around their interests and preferences. It's not always the easiest task in the world, but it is something that is really valued and important to keep the individual as happy and comfortable wherever they are. And then I had mentioned some challenges along the way, but these are real challenges in terms of balancing autonomy and protection is more around the person-centered planning. Managing resistance or disagreement, that really comes into play either when parents who are current guardians are getting older and they don't like the decisions that you're making, or the individual doesn't like the decisions that you're making. How are you going to manage that? And I would just say the best thing to do is just to have a lot of conversations and talk about emotions and what's going on as to why they might be resistant to a decision that you're making. And through conversation, it often works out. Not always, but it's something that ultimately, if you can't reach an agreement, if you're the guardian, you make the final call. But that's something that you're going to have to address at some point. And I think more conversations about the feelings around why they're resisting something or they disagree is going to be very helpful. Coordinating multiple service providers, I already mentioned that, but you do have a support coordinator available to you to help you with that. So often, and not always, but often, if assuming you've picked one, that's a lot of work. That's a full-time job in and of itself. So I would encourage you, if you can find somebody else to help you with that, I'd really encourage you to do that. Navigating benefit systems. There's Medicaid, there's SSI, there's SSDI, there's Medicare. And then under the Medicaid umbrella, there are lots of different waivers that allow you to access different benefits. So it is something that could be challenging to navigate. So the more information you have available at your disposal, the better. Who's going to be responsible for handling emergencies? This is a funny dynamic that's currently occurring in my family because, and I say funny in a sarcastic way, because my brother is taken to the emergency room every time, not every time anymore, but often when he has 2 or 3 seizures in a row. And on one hand, that's like you could say that's a wonderful thing that they're attentive to him. But he doesn't always, there have been many times throughout his life that he's had 2 to 3 seizures in a row, and there are steps that you can take before taking him to the emergency room. So we don't, so, but every time they take him to the emergency room, initially my sister and I were dropping everything and going to the hospital. And then we realized that we can't do that every single time he goes to the emergency room. So we have to now ask more questions to determine, do we need to be there right away? Or is this something that they're just going to probably do as a precautionary measure and take him and then have him discharged a little bit later? So it's, how are those emergencies going to be handled is something that you can have conversations about it, but ultimately it's going to be based on experience and decisions that you need to make based on what's actually happening in the moment. And the others are self-explanatory. So these are the different benefits that I mentioned before that individuals with who have guardians may be entitled to. They could be entitled to SSI and Medicaid. Usually it's after they turn 18, because before they turn 18, the government looks to parental income and resources, which usually jeopardizes their ability to be eligible for these benefits. But after they turn 18, they're only looking to the individual's resources. So they often are then eligible for SSI and Medicaid. SSI are monthly checks that go to the individual for food, shelter, and clothing. Medicaid is health insurance, but it's primarily the primary it's funding for adult services. As parents age, they'll be eligible for Medicare. So the individual with special needs could also be eligible for Medicare as a dependent. Medicaid waiver programs I talked about briefly, and the rest I've already talked about. But these are different benefits that as successor guardians you should be paying attention to figure out what it is and what the benefits are and when the person would be eligible for it. Again, I'm running out of time, I know, so I'm going really quick. Housing options, they can live with you as the guardian. They don't have to live with you. They can live in a supervised apartment or maybe an apartment where somebody comes in and checks on them. Group homes, or many group homes around the state. Some are great, some are not so great. Home modifications, you can make modifications to your home to allow the individual to live close with you or your loved one to live with you. You can also modify a different house to make it easier for them to live there, to the extent that it's necessary to modify the house at all. And of course, the housing vouchers, you can get money to support, to help with living arrangements. And then lastly, these are different people that can be on the support team if you feel it's necessary. But I highly encourage you to, if they're not on your support team already, find out where you can go to get them to be on your support team when necessary. So with that, Melanie, I'm going to defer to you.
Thank you so much. And Hillary, I know that you have an appointment after. Can we get to just a couple of questions? Do
Sure,
you
of
have time
course.
for?
Yep. Yep.
Perfect. Let me know when you need to go.
Mhm.
So I actually have a great question that came in. Just because someone is now a guardian who was identified as a successor guardian, just because that person's younger in age than their sibling, doesn't mean that that person is going to outlive their sibling.
That's true.
So what does that process look like if a successor guardian is already in place? and nothing else is identified. What can that successor guardian do to make sure that there is a plan B if needed?
You can, if you're not sure, I usually have 2 to 3 successor guardians, or I suggest my clients have 2 or 3 successor guardians in their wills. In the event one person is not able to serve or can't serve for whatever reason. If they don't have somebody else, they can contact the Office of Public Guardian to step in. They can also contact the ARC, or my favorite, which I shouldn't be advocating for condoning any services, but Plan of New Jersey has been wonderful in terms of stepping in to serve as a guardian when the need arises. They charge a nominal fee, but it's worth it. They know what they're doing and they can advocate when necessary.
Fabulous. And can you talk a little bit about if someone got guardianship or obtained guardianship? I apologize for how I worded that. But if someone obtained guardianship of a son or daughter and they lived out of state and now moved to New Jersey,
Mhm.
um, does that have to be redone since they moved to a new state? What does that process look like?
Yeah, you do have to do a guardianship transfer if the individual you got guardianship in New York or another state, and you're transferred to New Jersey or vice versa. The process is different depending on the state. We've had clients who've come here from California or moved to California, and they don't have guardianship in California. They have conservatorship, which is different from guardianship. But the general framework is that you have to terminate the guardianship in the state in which it came from, and then ask the judge to appoint you as the guardian in the state in which you are in. And in terms of how involved it is, it really just depends on the state that you're coming from or going to.
Fabulous. Um, and let's see. Can you go back to the slide that was showing the steps to guardianship?
Um, yes. And these are again this is for a general guardianship, and this is not, there are additional steps depending on who's applying for a guardian, to be the guardian, but these are that's the general steps.
And if the parents are currently guardians, but they want to add one of their other children as co-guardian with them,
Then
even if they're not
you have to
present.
file a complaint with the court, to have the person be added as the co-guardian. You don't need to do medical evaluations anymore because that individual has already been determined to be in need of a guardian. But you'd have to get everybody. You'd either provide consent through certifications, or depending on the circumstances, there might be somebody that meets with you to determine whether you are appropriate guardians. Again, it just depends. They're called a guardian ad litem. So it just depends on how contested it is. But if everybody's in agreement, you just sign certifications that you agree, and usually the court just orders it.
Fabulous. Hillary, can you go back to my last two slides one more time? I know that you had a hard stop at 1:15. I want to honor that. This is a slide of how you, actually, can you go
I'm
back
sorry.
one?
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Sorry.
So this is a slide of how you can sign up for the Community Living Education Project newsletter, special announcements. We do monthly newsletters filled with a lot of resources outside of CLEP. And we will also promote a lot of the webinars and other agency webinars that may be beneficial for you to hear. So go to that link. Feel free to take a quick snapshot of that QR code. You're going to see Natalie Trump's and my phone number on that screen. Feel free to reach out to either of us. Natalie is my supervisor and is a wealth of knowledge and information in helping families navigate community living, right? And community living is outside of just where someone resides, right? It's actually being part of your community and being engaged in things that people have preferred interest in. And Hillary, I do want to recognize you for bringing up person-centered approaches and planning in this. It's one thing I think that the whole CLEP team really empowers families to take that approach. So thank you again for pointing that out. Just for
Yeah.
someone's well-being, health, and happiness, it is vital that everyone's taking that person-centered approach. And you're also going to see the rest of our CLEP team's email addresses on the screen. So feel free to reach out in any way that you can. And if you'll go one more slide, Hillary.
Yep.
And just know that this presentation was recorded. We will send out a copy of this presentation,
Right.
and it should be received by the end of the week. We know that we did not get to many of the questions today. When you receive a copy of the recording, it may not come from my name. It may come from CLEP or it may come from Zoom. But you will see that it will have the title of today's presentation. Click on that. Feel free to reply to that email. It will have my contact information. So if you have a specific question that wasn't addressed, we'll do our best to help you with that. And if we can't, we will definitely reach out to Hillary to provide some guidance and assistance. This is a QR code for the quick evaluation that you're going to see that's going to pop up on your screen as we're preparing to say goodbye today. It's going to take maybe 30 seconds. It's the information that you provide us that allows us to better serve you and the community moving forward. Hillary, with that being said, it is always a pleasure working alongside you. We thank you again for giving your time to our community, sharing these resources. We know that you're passionate because you're a family member and through your lived professional experience also. So thank you as always. We greatly appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. And if you have any other questions, we're based out of Princeton, New Jersey, but we do Zoom consults and we practice all over New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and this point across the country. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Freeman Law Offices, and our website is www.freemanlawoffices.com. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thank you, Hillary. Be well, everyone. Thank you.